Never Say Die came out in October 1987. The book's title is very similar to the number one song at the time, Never Gonna Give You Up. Coincidence? I think not.
Argofunk Book Review, Argofunk Book Review.
The premise of the book is that George is competing at a velodrome. After Nancy looks up velodrome in the dictionary, she knows this is a bicycle race. Specifically, it's the World Junior Championships, which is conveniently located an hour away from Nancy's house. We start by meeting George's sponsor, a rich programmer named Stephen Lloyd. His assistant is Peter Cooper, who handles George's publicity. Stephen and Peter surprise George by giving her a fancy disc bike. That's nice of them, but I don't think it's a good idea for George to switch bikes 5 minutes before the big competition. But she's George, so obviously she wins the race easily. George's cycling coach is her boyfriend, John Bernstein. Whoa! Continuity! In case you don't know, John started dating George in book 3, after she basically sold out her friends in order to date a hot guy. John is an Olympic skier, which somehow qualifies him to be a cycling coach, even though skiing and cycling are totally different sports. When George goes to get a drink, somebody traps her in a tent and sets it on fire. Nancy saves George's life, and since this book was written during the Cold War, the prime suspect are the Soviets, who have come to make sure their competitor is not corrupted by American teenagers. George deliberately baits the Soviets by talking to the Russian girl at every possible opportunity. George, I know this isn't the first time you've tangled with communist assassins, but maybe you should consider not risking your life for no reason. George does well in her next few races, and there is drama with her boyfriend. Remember book 3 where John's amnesia was cured by an avalanche? Yes, an avalanche cured his amnesia. It was stupid. Anyway, he's finally remembered that, oh yeah, he has another girlfriend named Debbie, and she decided to reintroduce herself by making out with him in public. John pushes Debbie away and says, I haven't talked to you in 3 years! That should be a clue our relationship is over! Debbie threatens to get revenge on George, and since George has never had a boyfriend, like, ever, she doesn't know what to do. Bess thinks George should dump that two-timing traitor, while Ned is all, no, it's totally okay to make out with other people occasionally. Nancy and I both did that in book 4. And Nancy is all, I thought we agreed never to talk about that book again. And wait, that's not what happens. The romance drama intensifies when Debbie spends the night with John. He claims that he officially broke up with her, but they were together until 2 a.m. So, yeah, that's pretty suspicious if you ask me. George breaks up with John, but it's tragic because they still love each other. Separately, they visit Nancy and beg her for romantic advice because Nancy is a love expert now? I don't know. Considering how often Nancy and Ned break up in this series, I wouldn't ask her for help with romance. The book's subplot is with Stephen. Somebody broke into his office and stole a valuable computer program. They demand $1 million in ransom, and they call Nancy's house to ask her to make the drop-off. Going out of your way to get the famous detective involved? Not a good plan, culprit. The drop-off ends with Nancy being pushed into a shark tank. The sharks are just as confused as Nancy is, so instead of attacking, they stare at her like, who are you and why did you drop into our living room? Nancy knows that sharks are attracted to erratic movement, so she escapes by swimming with regular strokes. That's right. Nancy drops into a shark tank, and she escapes by swimming away while the sharks do nothing. Kind of anticlimactic. George is also having a bad time. The culprit 6 dogs on her, breaks into her house, tries to run her over, and tries to drop a flagpole on her head. Not the best week ever. During the final bike race, George foolishly breaks away from everybody else and goes off track. An hour later, her unconscious body is found in the woods. Poor George. Nancy solves the mystery when she realizes the culprit's real target isn't George, it's her bicycle. Why? because the culprit is Peter, and that's where he hid the floppy disk with Steven's computer program. You always keep a floppy disk on a disc bike, right? Ugh. Once again, we have a good book ruined by a bad culprit reveal. Hiding $1 million floppy inside a bike is a dumb idea, and it's totally unnecessary for Peter to try to kill George 7 times in order to get his hands on her bike. I mean, he's on a first-name basis with her. He could have easily asked to borrow her bike for a while, and that would have bypassed the entire mystery. Peter further proves he's an incompetent criminal during the ending sequence. While Nancy escapes on George's bike, Peter tries to shoot her with a gun. He misses 5 times in a row. When Nancy turns around and bikes directly towards him, he misses 3 times in a row. Either Peter is a really horrible shot, or he knows this is the sequel to Book 3, and he's trying to break that culprit's record for most failed murder attempts. The book ends with George and John becoming a couple again. There's a cute moment where George says she really likes John, but the people she loves most are Nancy and Bess. Sorry, John. Sisters before misters. The end. Post-book follow-up. There's one murder attempt that doesn't get explained, probably because it's the only one that doesn't take place near George's bike, so it doesn't fit in with the rest of the book. Here's what happens. George goes swimming at her hotel, where the culprit has electrocuted the pool with a radio. Nancy jumps into the water with all her clothes on, and she saves their lives by unplugging the radio. It seems really reckless for the culprit to make a public murder trap like that, on the odd chance that George might want to go swimming after a big bicycle race. Peter's lucky an innocent bystander wasn't killed there. The romance drama in this book is interesting, my favorite part of the book. You know how much I love romance drama. And I think it's interesting here because the author takes both sides of the argument seriously. Unlike other books where the author declares that the main character is right because they're the main character. Or maybe I find it interesting because unlike Book 3, George is in character during the romance parts. And it's an interesting side of George's personality, because she normally likes to suppress her emotions in favor of being competent and in control. This is George. She doesn't know how to handle her emotions and what to do. And maybe it's just interesting because all of the characters are fighting with each other. It's a huge cat fight. How often does Bess fight with Ned, after all? Nancy tries to stay neutral, so it's kind of like she and the reader are both spectators to the huge drama. Anyway, romance drama is good. One final thing I want to mention with the romance. Debbie says that she and John were practically engaged. The character list takes this a step further and says they are former fiancés. So, were they engaged to each other or not? Overall, this is a good book. It's a huge improvement over the previous book with John, and the author is clearly knowledgeable about cycling competitions. My only problem with the book is the ending, where it turns out everything happened because of a floppy disk hidden in the bike. That was dumb. I think the book would have been better if it kept those storylines separate and gave us 2 different culprits. Just for fun, I'll do the opposite of my Book 3 review and take off 3 points for the ending. So I give Nancy Drew Files number 16, Never Say Die, a 7 out of 10.